Okay, hi everybody. It's Justine Zavitz, and I'm here again for another one of our unique videos that we've been doing with special guests. And today I'm really excited because we have Cecily Alexander with us. Cecily is someone that I have known since as long as I can remember, really. We grew up on the ski hills together. I went to school with her kids. I've known her forever. But recently, Cecily wrote a book. And the book brought out some things that I did not know about Cecily and much of what has happened to her in her life. So the book is called Immigration, Race, and Survival from Trinidad to Canada, Living in Parallel Worlds. And it touches on a really hot topic that has come up in the past couple of years in the Black Lives Matter movement about racism and racism in Canada and Cecily's own experiences with racism. So I wanted to have her on today to talk about some of the get to know her better, first of all, but to talk about some of what she faced and some of her own experiences and how those experiences changed as the decades changed and kind of how we can move forward as a society on some of this hot topic that we've been hearing so much about lately. So thank you for joining us today, Cecily.
Thank you. Thanks, Justine. This is my first interview on my book, so I'm very excited.
Well, I'm really excited that we can be your first interview. It's very special for us as well. Now, I've mentioned that I didn't know most of this about you up until this book came out. And so why don't we start with tell us about yourself. Tell us about where you're from and how you moved to Canada and some of your experiences in getting here.
Great. My book starts off from the time I was 4 years old, and it goes all the way up, the first 3 chapters, until I was 19. And then my immigration to Canada was really based on my brother insisting that it was a good idea for me to do my university degree in Canada versus in Trinidad, where I grew up. So I came up to Canada in 1969, and I just missed university in September. So my brother thought, great opportunity to work for the year and save some more money towards going to university. Well, this was where I went through a total shock in terms of, I hadn't thought of my Blackness or where I was from being an issue, but it was. I walked the pavements and just could not get a job. I thought with grade 13 marks, being bright, articulate, outgoing, that should not be a problem. In Trinidad, there would have been a lot of government clerical jobs I could have gotten. Nothing. And when it really came, the first thing that happened to me was a Kodak company. I describe this in my book, where the gentleman just held my hand and said, "Oh, Cecily, I really like you, but can't hire you because people won't come to my store because you're Black." And it hit me like a lead balloon. I talk about going to the bus stop and sitting on a bench and crying. And I thought, this is why, none of my interviews have been successful. So at that point, I thought about giving up, but you'd see in the book that I talk about my mother being a really strong personality in terms of survival. And I heard a voice behind me, keep looking, go on. And I applied for a job. I thought, okay, if I can't get an office job, I'll work in a dress store. So I applied for a job in a dress store, thinking I blew the interview because I went in. And somehow this dear old Mrs. Higgins put her arms around me and said, "Is it very difficult for you?" And again, I continued my crying and told her my story and felt better when I left her office. But she was the one that phoned up the next morning and said, "You start at 9." So that to me was my start of really getting a real job. Edmonton, as you can think of in 1969, was very, what you call redneck. It was not a welcoming place to me. I was unhappy. I had left a fairly I was a teenager that went to the beach and water skied and did lots of fun things in Trinidad. And then to come up here to be seen as someone disadvantaged and not really recognized was really hard for me. But I had a friend in Toronto and decided, hate the West. My brother said, not going back home. So I said, well, I'm moving east. And came to Toronto. And really, throughout that, you will see in my book, in the 70s for sure, a lot of overt racism, where I was called names, the N-word, the go fetch, a lot of racism that was very overt happened at different times. And when I talk about survival in the book, I learned how to survive. I learned how to externalize racial comments. I thought of those people are not as educated, they're ignorant, they're whatever, but I just moved on and avoided situations that would put me into positions where I would be uncomfortable. So sort of really jumping ahead, things in the 80s moved from being overt with political correctness to being more covert. And again, in my descriptions, I talk about the horror of two workplaces in particular, not the people that hired me with restructuring when I got a change of a manager, in both cases, nurses, where it was a nightmare experience. One of the things when you read my book, I talk about a lot is I knew what was happening to me was wrong, but I didn't have the words.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, it's such an interesting story because we are in Canada. I have personally always felt very blessed to be in Canada and to be a Canadian, and it's so often that you don't think of Canada as being a racist society in the same way. We hear a lot of stories about Americans and so on. So in the same way as maybe our friends to the South. So it's so interesting to hear your experiences in going through that. Now, you mentioned a little bit about, coming into Canada and coming from Trinidad. Your childhood or your growing up in Trinidad, like what kind of family were you from? What kind of experiences did you have there? Not with racism necessarily, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was led to believe that in Trinidad, you're from a middle class, relatively like not poor, poverty-stricken family, like many people think when they think of immigrants coming to Canada. So is that right? Are you, your family or you're growing up in Trinidad?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And I think Canadians think of Blacks as what they knew of American history. Mm-hmm. And what is so different in Trinidad is we are a Black country with only about 1% to 2% of the population white. So our leaders have always been Black, or we have a big East Indian population in Trinidad, East Indian, but people of color. It's always been people of color in our leadership. So likewise, you hear now, especially in the news and some of the movies and things that you look at, a lot about things like Jim Crow laws, that there were segregated schools, that Blacks had to fight to be educated or have equal education. You hear about segregated schools, segregated washrooms, segregated restaurants. None of that I knew of. And lynchings and what happened to Blacks during slavery. You have to realize that none of that was part of my history. And part of researching this book, I really wanted to know my history. And I bought and read ferociously of some really good authors that totally described the difference between America, and I actually don't think the same as American Blacks, and I wanted to know why. Why did I think so differently? So part of it is, if I think back of my family, and I talk about this in the book, I come from an educated family. My grandfather owned his own pharmacy, it's called the electric pharmacy, because I guess electricity was just in that part of the island at the time. And he was a pharmacist, and this is in 18 something, he died in 1900, I've forgotten exactly, 5 or 6. But in the late 1800s, he was a professional. And I describe all of my family as such. So people have said to me, because they don't know and they just assume, they have a certain assumption of what an immigrant is. And after I got my degree, I remember one of my good friends, my husband's good friends, saying, "Oh, Cecily, you should be so proud to have your degree. Your parents should be really proud that you got this far." And I'm thinking, well, they expected
Why
nothing.
wouldn't I?
That's why I came here, and I would have had my degree in Trinidad also. So anyhow, it's this lack of knowledge. And I think because of this lack of knowledge, you're treated differently. It's when you talk about Canadians, I talk a lot in my book about immigrants. And it's interesting that I think most people see immigrants as their conception of refugees. So there's a lot of generalizations about immigrants being poor and disadvantaged and coming here to take advantage of this fantastic country, without you knowing that economically Canada cannot survive. Your birth rate is too low without immigrants.
Exactly.
And immigrants are a major part of small business, the first ones to, probably because they're not hired as easily into traditional jobs. We contribute to the economy. So I remember one of the posts my girlfriend was saying of one of her close girlfriends, someone I know too, was you hear a lot about my tax dollars and my tax dollars, going as though it's supporting immigrants, but it's all the immigrants like myself that also pay tax dollars and are supporting your pensions too. It would be nice if you could have I would say after the Second World War and going back that far, immigrants wanted to come here from England or Germany or the Eastern European countries, white immigrants, but that's not the case. Their countries are fine. So of course, most of the immigrants are people of color, and that's where the problem lies, in terms of some of the stereotypes and racism that occur.
And it's so funny. So obviously I'm in the financial industry and I work with a lot of immigrants, but not ones that come on the refugee status of things. More often they're coming to seek, a professional career here, and they're coming with assets like you can't believe. And, they have tons of wealth that they're coming here for. They're just looking at a different opportunity rather than coming for more prosperous life for themselves and their family. So yeah, it is very, very different. And it's interesting to hear that, because if you're not digging into people's financial questions and net worths and so on, you wouldn't recognize some of the wealth or a lot of the wealth that comes or that is here when people immigrate here. So that is very, very interesting. Now, you came to go to university. You came in 1969. When did you actually start university?
I actually not until 72, because I moved to Toronto in 1970. And those 2 years were me deciding, what am I going to study? What do I want to do? And my courses would get to more business, but I didn't have the chemistry and chemistry in particular that I needed at night school to get into nutrition, because people don't realize how much of a science-based course nutrition is. So I just went to Jarvis Collegiate in Toronto, and everyone said, oh, you're going to have to do grade 11 or 10 or whatever. I said, no, I'm just doing grade 13. So I did grade 13 chemistry, passed it, and then was able to apply. Because the year before, when I applied to U of T, I was told that, oh yeah, great marks and great everything else, but you need chemistry. So that was the 2-year delay with people in Trinidad going, when are you going to start? You know,
I'm sure.
1972 to 76 was my degree.
Okay, so you kind of mentioned that through the 70s, there's a lot more overt racism, but then into the 80s, it became more covert. And I think in your book, you talk about this maybe in terms of microaggressions that you experienced and how that was quite different for you from the overt racism that you had experienced. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Sure. And one of the things I say with my memoir, somehow I've always wanted to write my memoir, but the timing was perfect because, well, I had more of a life, 50 years in Canada, my time at home. And interestingly, I looked on my phone today to double check. It was 2017, skiing in Utah with a guide that I was chatting with in the chair, probably sharing some of the difficulties I had within the work environment. And he said, those were microaggressions. And I went, what? He says, yeah, that's my wife's research. She's a psychologist and she does all her research on microaggressions. So actually, even now, it's still in notes on my phone. I typed the word at lunch. How do you spell that? What is it? Microaggressions. And I came back to Canada in 1917 and researched it. And I went, aha, everything that I was experiencing fits this definition of which is a form of racism. Right. So what is microaggressions and what happened in the 80s? So it's actually my job that started in the 80s. And in my book, I have disguised the names of the hospitals, disguised the names of the people, just, for privacy purposes. Mm-hmm. And I live in Southern Ontario. I haven't identified exactly where anything occurred. But again, my first set of microaggressions, and first let me get into a bit of the definition. It's subtle. It's called snubs and exclusionary behavior that happens. And I fit in more into a sub-definition of microaggressions called micro-invalidation, where everything you are is invalidated and you're tried, your thoughts, your feelings are nullified and negated, and they try to make you invisible. So in one of the workplaces I describe, I was a manager there for 8 successful years. And then with restructuring, I got a nurse manager. And that's where the microaggressions doesn't start there. They started probably at the beginning of those 8 years, but this was someone that I didn't have any relationship with. I mean, she was my boss, and she wasn't anyone that affected my work. So although I noticed this behavior from her towards me, where I would say hello or whatever in the hallway, she would not acknowledge me. It was just, she was in charge of the quality assurance program at the time at the hospital that I was at. And we had a meeting to discuss the clinical quality assurance program. Mm-hmm. And what did she do? She made the appointment with the food service manager, and throughout that whole meeting, addressed her and would never address me directly. It was just really odd. But then again, I just didn't have a word for what she was doing. When she became my boss in this last year, and it was crazy time, restructuring, the managers or the VPs that I had a good relationship with were all being restructured and had to reapply for their jobs. So it was a really crazy time. And this was when from the day one, the day that I met with her, she came into my office and said, I shoot from the hip, and basically told me all of these things that she thought was wrong with me. My accent, how I talked with my hands, how I did this. And the criticism was unreal. I tried to kind of stay below her radar as best as I could. And offer to do things for her. Do you want me to? We had this cook chill system in the hospital that with a nurse she knew nothing about. I researched it and did a report on it. I was doing as much as I could from that point of view. But what things did she do to invalidate me? Give you examples of what micro-invalidation is. I reported directly to the VP, but because I was then under her, she said, no, you report to me and I will take everything you've done to him myself. So that link was cut off. I chaired my dietitian's meetings. That she took off and said, I'm going to chair, or you have to share the chairship with your staff. So that my voice was shut. I wanted to be on more committees, but she wouldn't let me. The one committee that I was on, a QA committee, hospital QA, not a hospital committee that I was on, she had another nurse report to her everything I said and critiqued it. At the meetings with her, it's mainly her, the manager, and a position called food service supervisors that are really below my level of dietitian. There was one of the dietitian in food services. She had one of the supervisors, food service supervisors, write down everything I said at the meeting. I still have the piece of paper, and rate me from 1 to 5 on my responses. It was pure hell.
Oh my gosh.
And I couldn't do anything about it, because if I went and complained to the VP, he would have then said, I'm not, Cecily, you're not coming on board, and it would have verified part of what she was actually saying, that I was not on board. Anyhow, to fast track that, towards the end of that year with restructuring, I say now I was fired, but what they say in terms of it was, it was part of restructuring. My job was eliminated because of restructuring, which wasn't really the case. And it was very much a vindictive firing, of which, when I think of it, the hundreds of phone calls I got after that, on my farewell party, I had everything from top management, VPs there, and whatever else. It was one of those things that she was able to justify, because even the VP that we reported to had to compete for his job in the restructuring process. So anyhow, went off and decided I wanted to do my master's anyhow, went to Guelph and did my MBA, and started looking for jobs where I was blocked all the way through. I just didn't get an interview in the city. There was this blocking. I was able to get a job in one of the smaller cities outside of the big city that I lived in. And that was great, 8 years of successful growth. And with this hospital was very, very conservative, right? So to give you micro-aggressions, where Blacks are seen differently. The nurses, conservative, I was the only Black person in this hospital, except for a few doctors. So I thought, oh my gosh, how did I not predict that this could be a problem? So, but it was okay. I was in another building and I did outpatients and loved it. So my coming into the main hospital was just to cover for the other dietitians when they were away, 2 other dietitians. One of the days when I was covering, and I'm there, and as you know, I love to dress, right? So I had on this
always look amazing
suede suit, and I'm charting. I'm reading the chart of a patient, and a nurse just comes and grabs the chart out of my hands, and I went, "Oh my God, what's the matter?" And another nurse came to her defense and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I thought she was from housekeeping."
Oh no, Cecily. So this kind of stuff, did this continue throughout your entire career? Like you say, you've been in Canada for 50 years, and it's hard to believe you're even 50 years old when we look at you. But, but did this continue from the 80s all the way through?
Examples all the way through. But what I say is, I just expected some of this to be there and happen, because people are inherently racist. A lot of people are, not all. I also talk about the white privilege I got from having a white husband, a white partner now, and lots of white friends. I sit back now because I'm very reflective and think, if I was married to a Black man, could I have crossed all of the places that I've crossed and met and done things? Maybe not. Maybe not.
Very interesting.
But that's just my reflection in retrospect. But anyhow, going back to your question was in terms of things happening to me. Of course, things happened, and I am confident. I'll go in, and as I said, I was able to just think, oh, these people are a little bit ignorant. I work on the principle very much. Michelle Obama said it, but it was my philosophy from day one. And the way Michelle Obama said it was, when they go low, you go high. And I have always been risen above whatever has happened. That's always how I've thought of things, right? So the way that microaggressions were so hard was in a power relationship. The two ones that I refer to in my write-up have been in two work settings. This is my career, my job, my salary. I was the main in our family. As you know, my husband Wayne was the ski school director of the ski club, and I was told him I did the real work in the family because and we would joke about that, but he loved what he was doing. I loved what I was doing. But my salary was important for the life of my kids, my pension, my health benefits were all with my job. And for someone to take it so casually and do things to me, to fire me, in that job I was fired. In this second job, it's people read it, and some of my friends said I've cried in that part of it, because in the second job, there was nothing they could do about my work, because my work was stellar. I read a lot. I was on top of nutrition. The doctors let me write orders for them. I was very recognized within the clinical sense. But when downsizing came within that hospital, and really they should have probably cut about 0.5 of an FTE, but they cut my whole position, thinking, great, I've gotten rid of Cecily. But me, because my background is HR and I have an MBA in management, I then said, shouldn't you offer retirement to an older dietitian than me in that position? And they said that when they looked into it, that's what they had to do. So really, they packaged her out, and I still kept my job. So I was fired once, but able to survive my job. Nothing. There are a few different incidences, but there's nothing this person could do to fire me in terms of my work. So what was her plan to fire me? You'd be really shocked when you read this part of my memoir, because it was attendance management. Are you familiar with that program? It's more, attendance management is a program when you have someone absent a lot due to sometimes in food services. I had someone actually when I worked in another city who would always be sick on a Friday and Saturday, or not be there for the weekend, and so you start off attendance management is a counseling system where you say, how are you going to work on this? How can you improve on your attendance? Okay, she started the attendance program with me when my husband was dying, and I had the first one was my rushing off to the hospital when he was admitted for emergency surgery. And I didn't come in the next day because I was up all night. I got my first disciplinary action with attendance management. The second one was again for another illness of my husband. And I've looked it up, I researched it since then, and this is not under the definition. It was really not what should have happened. I lost a lot of weight. I really was not coping, and went to health services, and she said, you need to go on short-term disability. You're not really performing. But I kind of thought I was working well and I was able to still assess until one day when I wasn't. And I really realized I'm putting patients' lives at risk with how I'm thinking. So I left and I went to my doctor and I was distressed. I said, they told me I needed a psychiatric evaluation to go on short-term disability. And my doctor, who's a GP, said, I write these all the time. I sign these all the time. That's so inaccurate. So he signed my short-term and I was off on short-term disability. Okay, so fast track, and my husband Wayne passed away, came back to work after my short-term disability was over. And my manager called me into office to give me a third disciplinary action, which I know I tell people the story and they go, that makes no sense.
No.
But the thing about it is, it's 3 strikes and you're out, right? So I'm sitting in her office as she's going through this. And one of the questions with attendance management is, what are you going to do to prevent this from not happening again? And I go, hopefully none of my kids die or get a critical illness. I mean, like, what do you want to say? That's the reason why I was off. So anyhow, she did the whole form and I was disciplined for the 3rd time. And what saved me was I retired 6 months later. So, and when I gave her my retirement papers 3 months after this incident, she said, well, why did you tell me? I wouldn't have had to do that. And I went, really? You know,
Oh my goodness.
Come on. So anyhow,
shouldn't have
some pretty
mattered.
tough stuff, and it is race related. I talk about the term uppity. It was just the fact that I'm a Black, not powerful, but influential enough person that they couldn't take. You know, you should not, like, know your place. You know, was a lot of how she was put down. I'll give you one more example. I wrote the guidelines, not the guidelines. I wrote the protocol for nutrition support for that stupidins and TPN. Not sure if the listeners would know what that was for patients in hospitals, in our hospital. I had a committee with the other dietitians, with the pharmacists, with 2 other doctors, 2 of the nurses from intensive care. And for the 5 years I was under this manager, she never took it up to get it approved, because by doing that, it would give me recognition. So that's a micro-invalidation, invalidated anything I did.
And I'm sure it was a ton of work.
Yeah. I was president of the college, and you would think for this small hospital, having one of your staff being president of their college, that would be something that they would recognize and do something about. Nothing. So those are some examples of micro-invalidation in a big, big way that I went through. Survival. That's why my memoir talks about survival.
Right. And so, you know, from this side of being a born white Canadian, you know, I always look at myself and think, well, I'm not racist. And so when I look at the Black Lives Matter movement and everything like that, I think, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. So, you know, your stories obviously show that there is racism in Canada. I don't think that's surprising to anybody, but it's maybe less overt than we believe in many ways, right? There's a lot of these microaggressions that I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing. Moving forward, I was looking at your website. For anybody who wants to see more about this, go to Cecily's website because it's awesome, CecilyAlexander.com.
Easy.
It's easy peasy. Yeah. So go to Cecily's website because she's got some great information on there. You can buy her book. Yes. But she's also got some blogs. And I was reading one of the blogs and I thought it was awesomely interesting because you talk about not racist versus anti-racist.
Right.
And I have a feeling that the Black Lives Matter movement and so on is trying to push the long-term objective, might be towards anti-racism versus not racism. Absolutely. So can you tell me a little bit more about that or explain to everybody a little bit more about that?
Sure. It's interesting. You're good, Justine. You did your homework because I just posted that last night. Yesterday.
Oh.
And why? It's really exciting that the Byron Villager which is one of those newsletters that you get, one of those magazines you get in your mailbox because you live around the corner from me.
Used to, not anymore.
Not anymore. I didn't realize you moved. Oh no.
I did,
Anyhow,
yeah.
the Byron Villager is doing an article because I told them about my book, and Barb, the person who is in charge of it, said to me, Cecily, what is the difference between not racist and anti-racist? And I thought, Barb, you have just made me write my next blog, because those are the things. So I sat down and wrote the blog. Okay, not racist, everybody says they're not racist. That's sort of what it is. Very passive position, not racist. Anti-racist is doing something about it. So opening your eyes, accepting first, because my other blog was the first blog I wrote was, I don't see color. And since I wrote my book, I'd go to deliver copies and everyone would want to reassure me, Cecily, I've never seen your color. But what I say into that other blog is, please see my color. Because if you say you don't see color, you're not opening your eyes to things that are going on around you, right? Mm. And I give a variety of examples, very simple ones in terms of see my color. I say, there's some of the stereotypes. If you're in a street with a lot of Black men, are you feeling uncomfortable? Do you clutch your purse closer to you? If any of those things happen, you are seeing color. If you're someone who, like one of my girlfriends said, her mother said, don't date anybody Black. If that has happened to you, you're seeing color. There's a lot of things to show that don't say you don't see color. You have it in your psyche and in your mind, right? So being anti-racist, I want you to open your eyes and see some of what is going on. People saw what was going on with me, and one person that just finished writing my book that wrote on it said, what about when you see something, do something? As simple as that. When you see something, do something. So I want you to question. I mean, it's something like even a racial joke. Say, that makes me uncomfortable, and why do you think that? Because you're perpetuating a stereotype, right? So it's, if you open your ears and listen to what people say, even this friend, I'm seeing your lovely dog in the background.
I know, it's my COVID puppy, obviously.
So even something as what was the thought that I had? You can do something. Oh yeah, this friend of mine says, oh yeah, this friend of hers is always, she can't believe her postings on Facebook. And she says a lot, she refers a lot to my tax dollar. Well, do something. I wanted to say something to that person about how inaccurate that is. I mean, what I think you do by talking about it or challenging it is you're not going to move. I talk about life being, let's say, all the way left and all the way right. And where do I fit into that? Maybe I fit into the right to the left. I'm probably halfway in between there in my thoughts. If someone is totally on the right, you're not going to maybe even bring them into that middle ground, but maybe you can nudge them a little bit more towards that area. And that's all I want to do. Right. One of my girlfriends, one of my neighbors, I went to sell her a book, and this will probably be another one of my blogs where people say white lives matter too. And I say, yeah, but they're not killing a lot of whites, and that's what the Black Lives Movement was about. It started off with Trayvon Martin, who was killed because he had a hoodie on and was going to buy a chocolate bar and a pop, a teenager in the convenience store, and he was killed by a neighborhood watch person that thought he was somebody was Black and made all the assumptions about Blacks as being dishonest and everything else. So what I'm saying is these things, if people have those ideas, so being anti-racist is taking a stand and helping us out, taking a stand, doing something. And there are going to be things all around you if you open your eyes and see color and see what's happening. So that's that in a nutshell is what anti-racism, being an anti-racist, is all about, right?
I love it. I love it. I think that's a great place to maybe wrap it up. A
Sure.
great thought to leave people with on, maybe moving forward, let's aim to be more anti-racist as a society. But I want to just repeat again, Cecily has a great story, a great book out there. If you go to cecilyalexander.com, you will find out how to buy it. And you'll find out
Amazon
a
is
lot.
probably the best place for your audience. If they
Oh,
go to
Amazon.
Amazon,
Everything's on Amazon, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Perfect. And so, yes, Amazon. But I really appreciate your time today, Cecily. It was awesome getting to know this side of you. I've always known you as, Cecily, I know your kids, we ski together. Wayne was like a ski instructor of mine at some point in my life. Yeah. So I've never known this side of your life or this history of yours. But I think it's so important for all of us to be opening our eyes. So thank you for your time and for sharing your story with us.
so.
And
Thanks, Justine. As I said, first interview. So, I am really glad I had the opportunity to share some of what is the reality of being in Canada that I love. It is my country. And I just want to be thought of as Canadian too, not where you're from or why you're here or any of those sort of things. I'm Canadian. I love it. And
Good.
I want you to read my story. And if you can, as someone white out there, you can do something about it.
Amazing. Well, for all of you seeing this now, you know that we're always doing interviews. We're always updating our content, and the best place to find them is on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Follow us on all those platforms, and you'll always know when we have new content out there. But of course, our website, zavitsinsurance.com, will always be hosting these types of interviews and updates. So thank you so much again. It was nice to see you, and follow us on our socials and get to know Cecily as well on her website.
Thanks.